Here are the richest heads of state in the world. Let's start. Prince Hans Adam II is the head of the princely family of Liechtenstein, one of the richest principalities in Europe. But he is also a businessman who studied banking in London. After graduating with a degree in business and economics, the prince wanted to go into business, developing the activities of the family banking group LGT Group, the largest private bank in the world, which is now managed by his youngest son, Prince Maximilian. However, in 2020, the prince had to face the coronavirus pandemic that hit many sectors, but this did not prevent him from continuing his activities and even making new acquisitions. Thanks to these strategic advances, Prince Hans Adam II's bank has grown by 6% in 1 year, achieving a net profit of 264 million euros as of December 31st, 2020. A nice figure for the 100th anniversary of the bank, which has enriched the 77-year-old prince even more, but certainly strengthened the curiosity of some media or specialists who are closely interested in the expenses of the prince, especially since the latter would actively finance research on extraterrestrials. But all this does not bother His Highness, who is said to be worth more than 4 billion euros today. With such a fortune, Prince Hans Adam II is now considered the wealthiest crowned head in Europe. Grand Duke Henry of Luxembourg is one of the richest sovereigns in Europe. Although he has always wished to remain discreet about his fortune and that of his family, the Grand Duke was the subject, almost 3 years ago, of an investigation conducted by an American news website, which estimated the fortune of the sovereign to be 3.55 billion euros. Of course, Henry de Luxembourg did not hesitate to react through the Grand Ducal Court to the figures put forward by this magazine and taken up by other media. Although he initially managed to deny the figures that put him in second place in the ranking of the wealthiest European monarchies, he probably had to be the subject of a new investigation, more in-depth this time, so that his fortune would be better known. Obviously, this investigation could finally prove the Grand Duke of Luxembourg right, but this would not prevent him from appearing for a long time, if not forever, on the ranking of the richest sovereigns in Europe. If there is one African head of state who is particularly known for his incredible wealth, it is Ali Bongo Ondimba, the president of Gabon. When he came to power in 2009 following the death of his father Omar Bongo Ondimba, the newly elected Gabonese president had many ambitions for his country and made no secret of his desire to make Gabon an emerging country. Seeing, however, that many Gabonese were still living in poverty despite their country's oil resources, Ali Bongo took a surprising decision in 2015, to say the least, to give away his share of the inheritance, a considerable fortune, to Gabon's youth. Similarly, he hinted that some of his real estate would also be ceded to the state. That is suddenly generous. If for Ali Bongo this action was synonymous with satisfaction and good conscience, his decision was nevertheless the subject of great skepticism from the population. For how can one liquidate one's entire inheritance without leaving anything for oneself? But this was not going to impoverish the Gabonese president, whose fortune was estimated by the magazine Forbes Africa to $1 billion, or more than 900 million euros in 2019. A significant sum that made Ali Bongo Ondimba the richest president of Central Africa and the second richest African head of state behind King Mohammed VI. José Eduardo dos Santos, one of the richest men on the African continent, was president of Angola from 1979 to 2017. During this long reign, the 79-year-old former head of state always wanted to control many of Angola's growth sectors, such as oil and some of the mining activities, by appointing some of his family members, including his daughter Isabel, to head some of the country's sovereign organizations. Obviously, this has long confronted him with his opponents. However, José Eduardo dos Santos has continued his quest for power and money, amassing a fortune that has been estimated at $31 billion, or nearly 29 billion euros. Misjudged for his wealth, the man who is considered the richest man in Angola has not been investigated for the origin of his fortune, at least not at first. So he will probably remain the richest man in Angola forever. His name is Hsien Loong, and he is, since 2004, the Prime Minister of Singapore, one of the richest countries in the world. A politician, but also a military man, a mathematician, and the president of one of the most important sovereign funds in the world. Hsien Loong has had the ambition to develop the economy of his country since his nomination as Prime Minister. Despite his many activities that occupied all his time, Hsien Loong put all his energy into the financial development of the city-state, which allowed him to enrich his country even more and to enrich himself at the same time. Moreover, according to the ranking published by a famous website, Hsien Loong was elected the best paid head of state in the world, with an annual salary of $1.61 million, or nearly 1.5 million euros. A salary too good to be true for many people, and which placed the Singaporean Prime Minister at the heart of a controversy. But this was far from impacting the political life and fortune of the strong man of Singapore. In addition to being immensely rich, Hsien Loong will forever remain one of the most powerful heads of state in the world. We are now heading to Qatar, where Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani has been the emir since June 25, 2013. Passionate about sports, the young 42-year-old sovereign would probably have wanted to make a career in soccer or tennis, two sports he had played. But his occupations as heir apparent of Qatar since 2003, then as emir, changed his path. The young ruler became more and more involved in political life by chairing several bodies and higher councils of his country, developing an economic flair that has allowed him to become very rich. In 2021, for example, his fortune was estimated by the American magazine Forbes to be around $2.5 billion, or more than 2 billion euros, making him the sixth richest ruler in the world. Although his fortune has often been controversial, this money has allowed him to acquire residence in France, to buy the PSG, one of the soccer teams he has supported since childhood, and even to go further by organizing the World Cup of Soccer. No wonder Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani is considered today as a rich and influential head of state. Here's another head of state known for his immense fortune, Ferdinand Marcos, the former president of the Philippines who led the country from late 1965 to 1986. 20 years during which Ferdinand Marcos before undoubtedly had for goal to get rich, even in an illicit way. Indeed, throughout his period, the former dictator accumulated investments and extravagances for himself and his family members, which allowed him to accumulate a huge fortune and to own thousands of properties, including an important collection of artworks. All of this, among other things, eventually led to the overthrow of the former dictator following a popular revolution that drove him into exile. Ferdinand Marcos then fled to Hawaii, where he died 3 years after his exile. The memory of the former president of the Philippines has never been erased since, and although part of the billions of euros that he had embezzled has been recovered, his fortune remains to this day surrounded by mystery. Maha Vajiralongkorn, better known as Rama X, is the king of Thailand since 2016, but it is also one of the richest monarchs on the planet. His fortune would be at least, remember this figure, $30 billion, which is equivalent to nearly 28 billion euros. But Rama X has always advocated a lifestyle of his own, even if this often makes him seem like a different king than others. Nevertheless, he is a ruler who keeps a close eye on his wealth and assets. The Thai king was even able to change the royal property law by placing the Crown Property Bureau under his control to manage his properties, including the thousands of hectares of land he owns. However, this means that Rama X no longer enjoys tax exemption. Nevertheless, he can be happy to see his investments, especially in real estate, intensify since this change, which will only make him richer in the future. Few of you know it, but Sebastián Pineda, the Chilean president, is also a businessman full of money since his net worth has been estimated, according to some sources, at $2.8 billion, or about 2.6 billion euros. A professor and seasoned businessman, Sebastián Pineda wanted to enter politics in 1988, although it was a big challenge for him. In the meantime, the man who would later become president of Chile in 2010 and again in 2018 continued his business and investments that brought him money and power, becoming the first billionaire to win Chile's presidential election. However, his presidential journey has been fraught with difficulties due to a few natural disasters and incidents that have shaken the country, such as the mining accident in Copiapo, where 33 miners were trapped in a mine in 2010 before being rescued. However, despite the image of bad luck that has often been associated with him, Sebastián Pineda can consider himself lucky to have achieved his political and financial goals, which today places him among the richest heads of state in the world. King Mohammed VI of Morocco ascended the throne in 1999 after the death of his father Hsien II. Having become king at the age of 36, his primary ambition was to serve his people and to make Morocco's image shine. But in addition to assuming his new role, the new monarch had another responsibility: to manage his affairs. For King Mohammed VI is above all a businessman who looks after his business and his numerous investments. His status as king, but also his numerous sources of income have helped him build a huge fortune that has been estimated in 2021 at about $6 billion, or about 5.6 billion euros. As one would expect, this fortune is often talked about in the international media, but this will not lower it because the king will continue to get even richer. It can be said that this will forever strengthen his good position in the African and global ranking of the wealthiest people. And finally, of course, we'll talk about Vladimir Putin, the highly publicized Russian president who has ruled the country with an iron fist for several years, and who is, according to some sources, one of the richest people in the world. Some even consider him to be the richest man on the planet, although his annual income was officially declared in 2020 at $140,000, or just over 130,000 euros. It is even said that he owns billions and billions of euros in several material assets, including a mega yacht, a palace on the Black Sea, and a collection of luxury watches. Although he has always preferred to keep silent about what he really owns, the Russian president has never ceased to arouse the curiosity of all those who seek to know the exact value of his wealth and property. And he must certainly have expected it because, as a well-informed man, he had already prepared many complex financial schemes that allowed him to hide almost any paper trail on his assets. This, however, resulted in a report being drawn up which, dare we say it, revealed his real wealth. A wealth that has recently become the target of sanctions announced by the United States and its European allies because of the war in Ukraine. But Vladimir Putin can rest on his laurels because this would not impact his wealth, and then no one would probably ever manage to discover this so-called wealth. That is, if he is really as wealthy as we think. Rich or not, Vladimir Putin will remain a financial mystery for the whole world. Now tell us in the comments which of these heads of state you just saw today surprised you the most because of their wealth. Don't forget to subscribe and click here to watch another of our videos.